It is time for Money Power Politics. And here's something to think about. The Trump administration is making big moves to help big business. And at the same time, they are pulling back on some key things that help everyday Americans. Tonight, the president hosted a dinner for some top Wall Street executives. According to reports, the list includes Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan and two of the biggest names in the private equity industry, Steve Schwarzman and Mark Rowan. This comes after we found out that the IRS and Treasury Department are giving tax breaks to some of these big companies, including private equity firms and crypto companies. Then you've got the White House pushing to end some free online tax filings for everyday Americans, right? Free tax filing, which is specifically to serve people that cannot afford professional tax preparers. So this is a huge win for those big businesses. Then you've got their game-changing 50-year mortgage proposal that could be a very big win for banks by potentially doubling interest payments over a very, very long loan. And now they're looking to eliminate the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, the one agency that is entirely dedicated to protecting consumers from financial fraud. This is all happening while life for everyday Americans gets more expensive. You do not need me to argue that inflation is at 3%. You know what your cost of living is. My question is the president?
I don't want to hear about the affordability because right now we're much less. If you look at energy, we're getting close to $2 a gallon gasoline. With Biden, it was $4.50, $5. Another thing, inflation. We had the worst inflation in the history of our country. Now we have virtually no inflation at all. It's down at a very low number and a very normal number. So the affordability is much better with the Republicans. The only problem is the Republicans don't talk about it.
Inflation is 3%, and gas, well, it is cheaper than it has been, is also $3. Donald Trump says he doesn't want to hear about affordability. Let's talk through this. I turn to you first.
Well, a couple of things. One is it's bad enough that just in the last 24 hours, the consumer confidence in this administration and Donald Trump is the lowest it's been in 51 years, since they started measuring it. It's never been worse. And when you have somebody, a president or any politician, they can say anything about the wall, they can say anything about tariffs, but you can't tell them that they're not feeling economic pain. That they're not going to buy. And if you're doing that on the one hand, and you're building a ballroom in the East Wing, and your press secretary is saying that's where his whole focus is, you're feeling it. People feel that pain, and then they look at the White House and they see all this stuff going on. They go, well, I guess he's not focused on what's happening to me.
But the thing is, Max, he knows this. OK, affordability is how Donald Trump won the first time. Affordability, our economy coming out of COVID is how Donald Trump won again. Affordability is how Democrats swept last week. Donald Trump knows all of that. So what's the strategy behind this?
So I think we know that. I'm not sure if Donald Trump knows that. I think Donald Trump thinks he won the election because of anti-wokeism and because of hatred for immigrants. And that is the lesson that he wants in his own heart, because that's what his heart is filled with, that level of hatred. What's amazing, though, about that quote that you just showed is the Democrats learned how stupid it is to talk like that. 2022, 2023, the Democrats were saying, no, this is only temporary and this is only a figment of your imagination. The stats don't say this. It is the stupidest thing to do in politics, to try to tell someone that their feelings are irrelevant and they should feel a different way. It never works. And it won't work for this president either.
But let's actually, beyond the messaging, the actual policies, right? Like, I'm not being sassy. To work on giving tax breaks.
You are sassy.
I know. Exactly like I said. To work on giving additional tax breaks to the private equity industry that year in and year out swan dives through the carried interest loophole while you're removing. Can I just tell you, I must have done a dozen Today Show segments explaining to consumers how free tax filing works on the government website for people who can't afford tax preparers, right? And when you do it online, you get your return quicker. On what grounds does any of this make sense if you want to get reelected?
Well, he doesn't need to get reelected. right? I mean, which is your point.
dragging
You set me up, it's fine. But, yeah, I mean, I think Max is right. I think you're right, which is that Donald Trump just doesn't care. I mean, this is a guy who on the campaign trail who said the word groceries literally as though it was a foreign word that he just learned, right? Like this is not something that is within his ken. And I think if we look at the White House broadly, your point about the ballroom was well taken. Look at what he's done to the People's House. The People's House was this sort of plain mansion that the people got to stay in for 4 years, and he's gilded the whole thing, inside and outside, because that is the way he looks at his power. That is the way he looks at his presidency. And he is taking the White House and taking the power he's been given through the presidency, and he is lining his pockets. That's been the consistent pattern. That's to a significant extent the pattern the first time around. But now it's very explicit with all of his crypto plays and what he's doing with business and, having these dinners and so on and so forth. He just simply does not understand the way this looks. I don't think he really cares about the way this looks. And instead, what you get is a president who is very interested in making business happy because it helps make him money, and they're paying him, millions of dollars for ballrooms and things like this. And then he cuts SNAP benefits because that's what the Democrats want.
One of the signatures of Donald Trump as a politician are Trump rallies. Right? He obviously does it when he's campaigning. He did it all through his first administration. And he goes to those places where people are economically disadvantaged and they feel left out. And he speaks to them and he says, I feel your pain. What is he saying at those rallies now?
He's only had 2 of them. I've been to both. One was in Detroit on his 100th day, and then the last one was in Iowa at the fairgrounds on July 3rd.
Compare that to what it was like in the first term.
He would go all about. And I think this is to the economic point of this here. Number one, for folks that were maybe watching Fox News tonight, getting back to the White House, Donald Trump was still talking to Laura Ingraham tonight from the Oval Office about new plans for the Eisenhower Executive Office building right next door to the White House, and that he's going to paint it all white. It was a 2.5-minute long segment. That is what viewers of Fox News were watching tonight, was his plans for the Eisenhower Executive Office building, painting it from gray to white.
Okay, but continue. Sorry.
This is the part going back to his campaign rallies that I think is important. The conversation that folks are having, whether they have a small business or a medium-sized business, or if you're one of those farmers out in Iowa, is the uncertainty of the economy moving forward, the uncertainty of their markets. When we talk about whether he understands the economic implications of his radically changing policies month to month, just for tariffs, for example, I think that he's ignoring the conversations that farmers in the Midwest are having. They are the ones, when you talk about, whether China's going to buy or not, it's the farmers that actually go to China and actually meet the markets and make the sell to buy their goods. It's them that go to Argentina to make the pitch to buy their soybeans. And when Donald Trump says, well, I got China to commit to buying $25 billion worth of whatever, right? That's not what they're looking for. They want to be allowed to do the job that they've been doing for years and years. And so the president, I just think, is out of touch here with those conversations that folks are having about the very ways in which they are operating on a daily
Okay, but I feel like Vaughn is continuing your last point. You can BS the American people about what's happening at the border. You can BS the American people about Ukraine or Venezuela or any of those things. But you can't BS farmers on trade. Like, you can't lie to my mother on the price of London broil. She knows it. And in that, she definitely does. And in that interview with Laura Ingraham, I don't know what they're saying tonight, but last night, when they're talking about the big plan for a 50-year mortgage, he said, it's just 10 years longer than a 40-year mortgage. And she's like, there is no 40-year mortgage, right? In that, he says everything's cheaper. Well, not beef. Oh, not beef. And she goes, and not coffee. And he says, well, we're going to work on lowering the price of coffee. Right there admitting that it's the tariffs that he has imposed. That's the reason coffee is so expensive. So he BS's the American people, as does Scott Bessent, who said on television today, I don't believe that tariffs are a tax on the American consumer. If they're not a tax on the American consumer, how are they suddenly going to control the price of coffee?
Well, exactly. But I think that's to your point, and to your point about the rallies. I think he fears going out there right now and facing those people, because he sees what's happening to these Republican members going back and doing town halls in the deepest of red states and getting their hair blown back. And
is it he fears it, or he doesn't need it? Because if he spends his time having crypto kings over for dinner,
that's right.
he can make a lot more money.
Less time dragging the sack, yeah.
But that's his ultimate project here, right? That, Donald Trump, my favorite thing about this show is Trump is watching, right? So we should remind him that we remember that he was never a part of REBNY. right? He was never let in. He never had a table at the Regency. This has been his life project, to get accepted by this financial elite. That's why he's hosting them, and not folks who are getting destroyed by his policies.
Exactly why he has Jamie Dimon over for dinner. Jamie Dimon didn't write a check for the East Wing. JP Morgan has said, no, we don't want to get called corrupt down the line, and that's what he's inviting over. The biggest CEO in New York who's beloved by that industry.